I'd like to start by thanking Hayden Saltner for welcoming us here this morning. And I also wanted to reflect just briefly, since I've got a 10-minute presentation today. It's like twice as long as I've ever had in this symposium before. So it feels like I've gone up a little bit in people's estimation, and it's a bit of a mini keynote. So I'll just start with a complete digression. In the real keynote this morning, Uncle Bob Muir mentioned at least twice, maybe even 3 times, the notion of the reef as a living cultural landscape, and he mentioned specifically submerged cultural heritage. Now, let me say the obvious. If we're going to go through the usual ritual of being unsure which button to press, that one. If we're going to acknowledge and pay respect to traditional owners, we need to listen. Now, this symposium, as it's developed, you would know if you've been attending that Maddie's presentation on cultural heritage is an exception. Most of what we focus on is reef protection, and so I think if we're going to take seriously what Bob said this morning, we need to consider: are we a social science community for reef protection? Are we a social science community for the reef? And so, look, I was really, excited to see Maddie's presentation and think there's a lot of scope. So this is not a criticism of our community. This is an observation. The focus on reef protection creates interest, and it creates funding opportunities, and it creates an opportunity to generate a social sciences community that we do not see in other landscapes in Queensland or more broadly through Australia. But if we're going to build on that, we need to think, we need to consider a broader agenda about what it is that we protect and put the culture into the bioculture. And we also need to put the well-being. Like, it's one thing to say strong people, strong country. Yeah, we're all for that. But where really are we dealing with the social and health conditions, economic conditions within reef communities? We're not dealing with them in this forum. Again, not a criticism, it's an observation. I am going to speak about trust today. At least a few of you were in the session this morning where my collaborators, Rana and Gillian, spoke about other aspects of this research that's been funded through the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. Some of the words that come up repeatedly through the different kinds of research that we do: hope, trust, and care. Now, we ask all sorts of questions to all sorts of people in different ways. These are recurrent themes. Gillian and Rana spoke this morning around hope and care. And here I'll talk more about, to say the obvious, trust. And in some ways, we're also motivated to look more deeply into our findings around trust by findings that were coming up through the CELT-MP project. A number of you would have heard Liz Hodman talk about that this morning. But so I'll be mostly talking about results from our big national survey. Also mention a few things from regional deep dive interviews. I won't go into the methodological detail. I'll just say we've done a lot of stuff and we've done it properly. So trust me. That's the theme. But we have in the past presented these data here, looking at a whole lot of things that predict support for undertaking research into the sorts of adaptation and restoration focused interventions that RAP is looking into, and also some things that have got nothing to do with RAP, but just to see if there's any difference. Important point here is that a variable that we call trust in science, so it's red, is one of the things that is a really consistently strong predictor of support. And so we presented this, and Matt Kernock stuck up his hand and said, that's really interesting, because we also pointed out, which isn't on this slide, that between 2 survey waves, 2018 and 2022, so no, we're not the first national survey to look exactly at what the Griffith survey looks at, but, it's not a competition. Our CELT-MP data seem to be saying something different. So that's really interesting. Why would they be saying something different? If we if we assume that both pieces of research have been undertaken competently, even allowing for some adjustment in what we're asking, why would we be seeing different results? And so, straight off the CELT-MP website, there's freely available data there on trust, and typically those of us in the research community look at a chart like this and we go, yay, we're the most trusted. Isn't that awesome? But then we get to these data, and to pick up the point that Matt made, there seems to be a not only statistically significant but concerning trend in trust for scientists. So there we go. Two different instruments seemingly finding contradictory results. So what's going on? Certainly in the deep dive interviews, we find evidence. There are people who do express skepticism towards science, who think that science, is captured by ideology and by financial interests, and that people have good reasons to distrust the Reef Authority, not the least of which is the zoning plan. But are we measuring the same thing? And actually we're not. So that particular item in the RAP survey, our survey, trust in science, we serially simplify things when we put them in charts. So trust in science is actually trust in science to develop solutions measured by responses to two questions. Scientific research can provide solutions to help prevent damage. Scientific research can provide solutions to help repair damage. Okay, so that's quite different to asking, do you trust scientists as a source of information about the GBR? So this suggests to us that yes, it is possible for people to have different views on these two questions. This also starts to pick up, I think, different ways of understanding what trust is. Trust is a great thing to ask people because we all know what trust is and we can answer a question simply without having a definition put in front of us. But we still may be thinking about different things. Trustworthiness may be associated with the perception that the person or the institution in whom you're placing trust is concerned with your well-being, or in this case, the well-being of the GBR. It may be a reflection, your answer may be a reflection on their integrity. It may be a reflection on whether they're morally and ethically principled in the way they do things. So I'll share quickly, we actually within the RAP survey look at these different dimensions. And what we find, so in this scale, you'll see the blue line, trust in science. So this is trust in institutions to do what is right, to act in the best interests of the GBR. We see that we did in this question as well have an increase between 2018, 2022, and then a slight decline. We find trust in the Queensland government went up quite dramatically, then came back a bit. So there's a bit of movement, but I would say no clear trend in relation to any of these. Who is more or less trusting? Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are more trusting of government. People with higher education tend to have higher trust across all institutions. People in employment tend to have slightly lower trust, which is kind of a bit counterintuitive. Women are more likely to trust government, international agencies, and men are more trustful of NGOs and science. Older people generally report higher trust in science. So there's a few trends there, though they're not particularly strong. And I'll leave some quotes up there for you to read, but I think that, the general trend is you look at these two instruments together, and I don't think they give us, I think the answer, the title of this project, is there a crisis of trust, I think is clearly just clickbait, in an attempt to make sure at least half the attendants at the attendees here come to this session and not the other one. But clearly that's no. But it's not all rosy. those sorts of issues that the CELT-MP team have highlighted around misinformation, social media, are real, but it's not quite room to panic. And everything that we've got published so far is open access, so you can find it easily and look at the data and arrive at your own conclusions. Thank you.